and I mean, in Ontario, when you look at the measurement field for the employment service contract, what's interesting and positive is that they're kind of hard measures and there's a relatively small number. So I would say, the category pros, that's good. The cons is exactly the point that you raised, is that if you're looking at an exit and an exit doesn't differentiate between someone who's has just left a job and a week from now is going to be employed and someone who's been out of the labor market 5 years, it's difficult. Now what I have noted, and that is that the ministry and the employment services contractors do work together to provide some understanding that clientele may be more difficult, right? So that the requirement for the number of exits may be adjusted based on the degree of difficulty of the clientele, but it's not reflected in the measure itself. And there aren't intermediate measures, so that it may have been, like in human terms, a huge thing for someone just to, let's say, attend class. Because the measure is an exit, if they're not employed, it doesn't show up as anything unless they're in full-time employment, and then it can be recorded on the system, I think, fairly as an exit. So that there's some, and so how much of the eloquence of a small number of fairly hard measures do you end up giving up in order to get this richer story?
Like you said, what gets measured is what matters.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, all the other things that we're doing, sort of before they even get to that outcome measure, doesn't feel sometimes like it matters.
Yeah, my guess is, and this is speculation because I'm only seeing 2 centers. I'm seeing 6 employment contracts in Hamilton and 2 here. So that's not a big universe, right? There's 240. Service providers in Ontario, so very, very small. But for those agencies that prior to the new contracting structure were working primarily with people at the margins of the labor market, they're going to get pushed into mission driven. You can see that simply because in order to meet the contractual obligations, they're going to have to go higher up the food chain. Right? They're going to have to deal with people that are closer to making that. So that's not the researcher in me saying that, because I can't table the results of that. It's more an impression that I've gained over talking with a relatively small number of people. So that's going to be harder for us to put in a report in that kind of a concrete way. But it's definitely an impression that I've seen.
The Workforce Planning Board, we have a challenge in trying to determine this continuum. We are there to help the workforce development, but it doesn't seem to be any quantifiable information that measures that group of people who have fallen through the cracks. So when we're thinking of matching jobs, demand and supply, this should be more of a continuum. So if we're measuring outcomes, it shouldn't be the outcome at the end of the line, but throughout the process. Because we may have 50% of qualifiable, employable people, but only after having gone through a certain process, they will reach the end of the line. But there doesn't seem to be any hard numbers. Every agency, we're trying to get a handle on that information, and nobody seems to have it. Everybody has their own parts. In your research, have you been able to see what maybe nobody else has been able to see in terms of having an idea where each segment of this continuum is it growing, who's growing, who's, is A, B, C, A being literacy, where you need capacity, and B, where you're starting to move towards getting the skills that you can be employable at the high-end level, and C being ready to get a job. Where are we? Are we A, B, C, and to what degree is A? Is that 50%, 30%? Nobody seems to know. In your research, have you been able to get a better handle on that?
No, there's an opportunity space for that, I think, that's emerging. So I'm going to speak about the dreaded case management system for a second. There's, you know, the one thing that I got an earful everywhere was like when you would raise this as the topic, right? And then people got really passionate. In Hamilton, there was one person that even said it was a little more passionate. It's not my system. But anyway, I think everybody's familiar with the case management system. It's a new system. So I think it's been in place less than a year. Or maybe just a touch over, but I mean, it's new enough that people are still working through both the human process of the work burden associated with the case management system. So, and the system itself has the inevitable problems of implementing a very large province-wide system and a new one, right? So we actually, this has been, this system is actually, I think, an Irish system that has been transferred here to Canada. But again, the other side of my business is looking at data and you know, the opportunities that there is a big data opportunity in that case management system. So if it, you know, if it can get enough of a runtime, then you can start to look, because there is enough detail in that case management system that you can start to surface some of these things. And if that can be fed into the policy process, then you might be able to look for finer points of differentiation. Right now, if I was sitting in Toronto, I'd go with exactly the system they have. Okay, so if I look at kind of my former job as a senior public servant, it's because for accountability purposes and for the management of contracts, you've got to pick something you can measure. And I think that my judgment would be that they've done what they can do, what people can actually measure and report on. There's a deeper set of opportunities that may exist in the case management system as it's written, because there's a huge amount of data in that system, huge amount of data in the case file. Right now it's unexplored, and I don't know what the plans are. Hopefully, when we're in Toronto on Thursday, I'll be able to talk with people that are working on, you know, how can we effectively use that, because it'll be for the first time province-wide. There will be a uniform system of data acquisition and presentation on people seeking employment in Ontario. There was Tracy, and then
I think what you're going to see, just to answer Frank and your comment, with the CAMS database, now that we have the frontline staff understanding the information that we're putting in and how valuable that is, and really having a connection with that. When we look at the data right now, it's a little bit blurred, because you can capture all of what you're asking for, but just in learning that whole process, there's been a bit of discrepancy. So now, moving into the new year, there is that level of understanding, so you're going to be able to see more of those outcomes. One of the things I wanted just to chat on with regards to some of the clients that Rand is serving, when they come into the employment service piece, they tend to be in service longer. And I would be interested to understand what that looks like from, in comparison with Northwestern Ontario to the Toronto area. Because when you look at the local labor market, we're a small community. So when they're entering into service, they're in service for a longer period of time. If you're looking at the resources of staffing and the program, the referrals and all of that piece, I mean, it's huge resources from a managerial perspective. And also, being barrier to enter into that labor market. So I'm just interested to know,
what do we look like in comparison to Southern Ontario in that area? And are we going to be looking at either increasing resources or some type of solution so that we can have individuals in service for longer periods of time and being able to meet their needs collectively as a community?
And when you say in services, means that there's an intake but not an exit. So it's an active file if we're talking case management. I think the conundrum is always going to be is that the ministry allows you to have as many of those as you want, as long as you're meeting your exit numbers. And so the question becomes a resourcing. It's really a resourcing conundrum, right? Can we continue to meet our exit requirements and fulfill our mission, which may mean that we're spending longer times with some individuals. So it's either that there's a resourcing formula that's based on kind of degree of difficulty, or some other feature. I can't say a lot about it. So I've got two communities, Hamilton and here. Here you're generally providing your services, like John has a specialized service, but you're really kind of drawing from the community at large. In Hamilton, you have a combination of what we call kind of general employment services and specialized employment services, so that there are some of the contract holders in Hamilton that are focusing on the immigrant community or focusing on long-term unemployed, so that they're really kind of zeroed in on a particular target group, and they've been able to negotiate some provisions within their contract so that they have a smaller number of exits for the resource base they have. Now, one of the things that's interesting is no one during the entire course of this survey has shared with me the exact conditions of their contract. So I've only talked in general terms. So I don't have all of the contracts and saying, okay, here's dollars in, here's the requirements, and that's understandable. So it's just a caution that I'm getting an impression from the people I'm speaking to, not necessarily sitting down with a great deal of data and analyzing things and saying that, this is what the case is. But the Hamilton situation is actually dramatically different than
Just to comment on that, we have seen a huge increase in individuals with mental health issues and really significant challenges, to the point that we have had to educate our staff on addictions and how to deal with, and the counseling piece, ensuring that we have good referring partners, because we're not, mental health counselors. So just looking at that, I think that's a huge gap for Northwestern Ontario.
Yeah, and I think in terms of one of the interesting pieces, so I'm now going to kind of go up to a macro level. If you look at the next 5 to 10 years with Thunder Bay, is the one thing that I can say with absolute certitude in terms of the economic development of the region and all the rest of it, is you're going to see more and more of that. As at a macro level in terms of, let's say, the increase in the number of firms that are going to be mining or, associated with the extractives, there's absolutely no guarantee in many cases that the region will necessarily participate in that. Like at the extreme, you could have an operator open up a mine, fly in, fly out, all of the people. I'm creating an extreme example. The ore kind of gets shunted about 150 kilometers north of Thunder Bay off to Sudbury, where it's processed. So it's just kind of coming straight out of the mining area, heading east. But what Thunder Bay will get, it will get all of the prostitution, the drugs, the crime, the people who will come into the community hoping that they will find, a job like all of that stuff you get. Which means that at the business end that you're at, you're going to see more and more of those kinds of issues. Now, I hope and pray that in fact that extreme case that I described, I mean, where all of the benefits will flow outside the region and the region just gets the problem. This doesn't happen. But it will be the biggest challenge that this region will have. Will be getting that balance, because you get the problems for free.
Two comments, sort of, with the case management system. From a ministry perspective, ES has been in it for a couple of years, and there's and stuff, but we're just coming online. So we're in a position where we have some baseline data, that we can make some evidence-based decisions, but we're using it for performance measures and those types of things, not to address the community delivery. So I'm just interested on, your thoughts on other jurisdictions in that area. And something that's come to mind a few times when we're speaking already was, when we're talking about service providers and stressing if they were to be away and again performance-based, as well as the resource employers, resource sector employers. I'm not sure if it fits in this project, but what is your insight into the value of succession planning? The end result of 5 years to be.
You mean in terms of the service providers? So I'll work backwards. The last question first is the nature of the interviews didn't allow me to get into what is the long-term planning of the agency. But by and large, the tone of the conversation, so if I'm just going on tone, short-termism is what it's like, very much day-to-day. How do we manage meet all of our requirements? I didn't have anybody volunteer. Here's our long-term plan, and here's how the short-term stuff is. People are still playing heads-up ball. Now that may settle down because this whole process is quite new and quite a large change for a number of the agencies. And here you have the benefit of the entire system to some extent, or a big part of it is in this room, and you can have a conversation. You get to Hamilton, it fills a couple of rooms, and the interconnections are much more complex. And in some cases, the agencies aren't actually even talking to each other. Just local dynamics. It's a bigger community. People can kind of hive off a piece of business, and they get protective about the piece of business. So you get dynamics. So I didn't see much longer term planning. The evidentiary piece, ideally, the evidentiary base that you're using to make your policy should be the same evidentiary base that you're actually using to do the accountability structure. So if you can couple those two, it's ideal. Because you could say, here's the basis for my policy. I'm using the same system of measurement to look at the results. So that would be, so I think you're really on the right track there. It's probably going to take a lot more time than people really have the patience. It's like very hard on an operator as you're going through that. But if you can get on the other side, I think you're going to have something that's actually quite special.
Can I just ask everyone when they have a comment or question to speak a little bit louder, because I'm pretty sure this camera's not picking up a lot of audio.
Is Thomas speaking loud enough?
If you could also speak a little bit louder, that would be great. And there's a lot of this sound here too, so yeah.
Oh, sorry, Frank. I don't know, from my perspective, I think that we will continue to see a gap in the information that we really need to be able to support us to move forward. Until the performance measures are better aligned with the eligibility criteria, say for example, of clients, there's going to be a gap, because within the literacy and basic skills program, what we're seeing is, so again, I'll just use an example, because we were talking about working with clients that are on Ontario Works. So with the LBS program, yes, that's one of the eligibility criteria that agencies are working with. You want to target it. There's individuals in the community that are on Ontario Works and they're not employed, and one of the reasons for that is that they need to develop their skills. That would be an eligibility criteria. However,
when you're looking at the exit, so what's being measured, it doesn't align. Obviously, an individual with low skills, it takes quite a period of time for them to, get the gains, for lack of a better word, that are required for them to move on to the next step. But yet the expectations are X number of people need to be served, and you need to get into the program and out of the program within a certain period of time so that you can have new intakes and more exits to meet the funding criteria. Well, we're finding that that's not happening. So if that's a target and or an eligibility, and you need to be, not need in a bad way, but you need to, like these are the individuals that have barriers, that have high needs, those are the ones that should be served, obviously, but you're not really able to serve them within the measures that are being expected of you. So agencies are constantly having this struggle, and then the fear that it would be perceived based on the measures that they're not delivering the program the way it's supposed to be delivered, and so they may lose that program within a given community. And so it's an ongoing struggle. And if they're not able to reflect that challenge within the data, we're never going to have the data, because they're going to be reporting the data that's going to more clearly show that yes, they're meeting program requirements. Where is the other data being captured? It's not.
And there's one of the unfortunate downsides of austerity, and we're seeing this at all levels of governments and across governments, is the discussion that you're engaging here is a normative discussion. How should a society treat its citizens? And do we have as a value that, every citizen should in fact have a kind of a standard of living that is, appropriate for a citizen in our society. So these are kind of really broad, gutsy, passionate conversations. During our times of austerity, they get handled in a technical discussion, right? We have so much money, we need to measure results, there's a smaller pie, but there's really, so that normative discussion's gotten shifted into kind of a set of technical criteria. And one of the realities of austerity, this is again, me with 37 years on the government side, is more of that important normative discussion is going to get pushed into a technical space. So you get program cuts because there's not enough money without the discussion about, what are we doing about mental health in our community. Right. So it's because no one wants to be in that discussion. No one wants to say we don't care about people.
Thomas, talking about austerity, those are not the results of austerity programs, because maybe in other countries that's being impacted right now through austerity measures. But I believe that has been something that has been occurring maybe through the forestry, the demise of forestry and the loss of jobs and displacement, about adjustments. Are those the people that you see now the result of the last 5 years of economic dislocation as we transition to a knowledge-based economy? Like, I'm trying to understand where it's coming from, where all this higher number of addiction and mental illnesses, where are they coming from? Is it something that didn't happen all at once? Are those the people that can't transition into a job? It takes a lot longer. You're saying that it's increasing. Is it increasing in the last year, in the last 5 years? Do you see a continuous trend? I'm trying to understand the dynamic that allowed this to, where did it originate? Did it originate in the recession in 2006 and 2007, or was something that has always been there and now we're seeing more of it?
It's a combination, in my opinion. Just looking at the job loss, we did 5 labor action centers just this past year of business closures, large business closures. So if you look at those individuals that are going through job loss, prior to that you had the forestry sector. And even with entry-level individuals like that have their skills match entry-level positions, there are no benefits with those jobs. So shared, having somebody come into your office wanting to seek employment, and they're working with Ontario Works, they have medical coverages for, you know, some of their health issues. So when they attach to the labor market, they no longer have that support. So they're looking for, you know, maybe something to help them cope with pain or whatever. So in some cases, they're better off to be receiving the OW benefits. So it's a combination, just looking at a case-by-case, client-by-client basis, in my opinion.
Another big thing was, I can't remember, it was in early 2000, so 2002, 2004. The criteria for getting onto the ESP was changed and permanently unemployable category was removed. And so the people that have multiple barriers to employment are exiting the education system, they're growing up, they're becoming adults, they're not able to function and able to hold a job, so they come onto Ontario Works. And that category, there was a significant percentage of those types of people that were on ODSP before, and they can no longer go on to ODSP. So they're not exiting Ontario Works. We continue to get more into Ontario Works, so that percentage of our caseload is growing. So if we look at our clients from 10 or so years ago, they're so different from what they are today, and it's because that population, our caseload, just keeps increasing because of all of these things we're talking about. All of these people fall between the cracks because you're not going to get an outcome from them anytime soon. You're going to have to put an awful lot of work into them. I'm not saying that they're permanently unemployable. I don't think there is a permanently unemployable. It just means that we need a whole lot more work put into supporting that person to get them to where they need to be to actually be able to function in the workforce.
And also just one final comment is that it's unlikely that this group of people may be able to acquire the skills necessary to enter the mining high-level skills requirement of a mining job or any other knowledge-based job.
And there's been a big change. Like, so, you know, I started my career like all good Maritimers, you know, heading to Sudbury with the first $100 that I spend on a car. The requirements at that time for miner were that you had a back X-ray, and the back was strong, like, you know, so I was a good strong kid, you know, and I'm in the mines. I get 1 week's training, and the rest of us training on the job. If you take a look at what a miner goes through now, it's a pretty sophisticated, you know, piece of work. So that the requirements for those jobs, those smaller number of mining jobs, are greater. But as well, like when you know, we would come up the cage after a shift, and you would go into the dry to change, there were people brooming the dry, and there were and these were all men that had, you know, an accident underground, or they had had a stroke, but the company would keep them on. So there was a whole pile of jobs that were kind of, you know, and everybody accepted that that was, you know, part of the cost of doing business in those days. Well, all of those jobs are gone. You know, like having a strong back doesn't get you very far at all anymore. You know, so you have this huge, and I think that there's kind of a general level of stress in our society associated with that. You know, so it just ups the ante all over.
Can I just ask a question? It sounds to me what I'm hearing is that the funding and the level of service doesn't always match the level of disadvantage. So what we see in Australia, for example, is clients enter an agency and the intake process assigns them to a stream, which is based on their level of disadvantage. There's 4 streams, so the most disadvantaged are in the 4th stream. And then what happens is, if you're the most disadvantaged client, the funding available to the agency to deliver the service is a lot more than the least disadvantaged client.
Back in my bed.
So I'm just wondering, like, it sounds like here within the Ontario, the employment service, that no matter what your level of disadvantage, the funding is the same, and the intake process is the same. So is there something that needs to be done there to adjust the service to the level of disadvantage?
I think this conversation is really meaningful too, because I'm not sure whether everyone is aware, but the expectation for service providers is that it's not just that we have a moral responsibility to encourage and do whatever we can to assist these people, but now we have responsibility has been added to the business plans for 2013-14. For the first time, we have been asked by MTCU what we will do to increase our partnership with organizations like Ontario Works, and how we will encourage and enhance services between the two of us. And that's a welcome kind of thing, because at least we're able for the first time to put in writing that what our goals are and what we hope to achieve. And it acknowledges, at least in writing, that we are making that happen. However, there's no way to measure our success or the amount of what we are doing with those folks. And there's certainly, those folks are not going to be measured in our exit outcomes at all. But the reality is that everyone's trying to do more with us, and we all know that. But the acknowledgement of that is what I'm hearing, and what we all know is the big issue, because it isn't reflected in our statistics relative to our exits and successes, and that's a big issue for us.
Can I just clarify that we're funded through the Ministry of Community and Social Services,
Right.
not MTCU, so I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Yep.
So we're not and there are some Ontario Works delivery agents that are employment Ontario delivery agents as well, and I think there's 5 in Ontario. We're not one of them. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I wanted to ask if there was anybody, like sort of higher level policy people or from Ministry of Community and Social Services that were part of this study. Because I see people from MTCU and Arnold here, and I don't see anybody from the Ministry.
I didn't interview anyone in Toronto. I used the results-based plan, okay, for the ministry to get the information on that. It was a scope decision. It was just a question of how many people I could interview. But if it's seen as something that's an important follow-up, that's precisely what we're having this meeting for, is sort of so I can circle back and then do those interviews and fill out the.
We need to move on to the next theme, but just one question I would like to ask given that discussion is whether you think it could help if the contracts which are designed in Toronto could be somehow adapted at the level of the regions. It's something that we will maybe discuss at the end when we talk about possible areas of recommendations, but maybe you could start to think about it. Is it something that has been evoked in some debates? Is it something that has been discussed? Or never? It would be a new idea.
The pendulum's the other way. In my experience, you're trying to make all service contracts the same.
The same. Yeah.
And that's in part consolidation from what is it, over 500 service providers, or nearly 500 service providers to half that number. I don't know the precise numbers, but I do remember them saying there are half the number of providers in Ontario that there were before the consolidation. So I think it's kind of and LMDAs are recent in Ontario. So, in Quebec, it's the first LMDA, so the longest experience of operating, which is now well
since 1997.
Yeah, so you have 1997, 2007. But I think you picked the Great Recession as the implementation timing for the consolidation. So you had to deal with a massive recession and sort of change the entire system. Steve has indicated that there's
Yeah, there's some food at the back if we want to just have a little